There we go. Okay, last time we met last week, we talked about, we had moved into the section on social commands and this formula that Jesus is working with, where there's an old command mentioned, not old, but a traditional command, then a new spin on that command, and then some sort of way to become obedient in that. So last week we had a very, I think, tender and helpful conversation about lust and fidelity and how we honor one another and how we don't always honor one another, which is for single persons as well as partnered persons. It's for everybody. We talked at length about as we learned about divorce in particular, especially, we learned that Jesus was removing an automatic right, and protecting what would normally be the female partner in the relationship, from being betrayed at will and discarded. So it looks like really tough speech, and was the intention of it was not so much punishment as protection. Jesus was kind of expanding the call that people would do the utmost for their partners as opposed to kind of the bare minimum, what's legal. And we acknowledged together that there are painful exceptions to that, right? Fulfilling that call. So thank you for your conversation. We had lots of personal commitments last week too. So I'm going to read them for you. Our personal commitments and ethical calls were to keep working on communication with the partner, modeling Donna's parents, another person said, making sure there is compromise and appreciating differences, deliberate, intentional showing of love and respect, being careful not to judge relationships and divorces that we know and understand that every relationship is different. Forgiveness, not dwelling on the past, is a gift to the one with the past. That was kind of the last one, that there can be new beginnings. So today you'll hear this formula set up again, the one we've been working with so much, the one that Jesus begins, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." And so you'll see that again. So if somebody would like to read, we are at Matthew 5, and I believe the verses are 33 through 37.
I can read that much.
Oh, all right, thank you.
Again, you have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord." But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to guess that you have probably never, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze here, I think. Maybe not. I'm guessing you've very rarely had this topic for Bible study about oaths and truth telling. Have you ever studied these words before? Have you ever even read them before? I'm seeing a lot of shaking no. I just don't think this is stuff that we necessarily find like that compelling in modern day. And so I figured it was unfamiliar, but the more I think about it, the more it's still this idea of oaths and truth telling, it's still so ingrained in our society and our culture. That was especially true in Jesus' day, but I'm not sure it's any less now. So I think it's important that we talk about it. So vows were a part of everyday life. They were not just tolerated in Old Testament times, but they were required. So if you read through the Hebrew Bible, you'll see many instances where oaths are sworn and honored and upheld. So as you think about, H, I think, had the word oath. Some of you might have vow, but I'm curious, what is that to you? When you hear that word, what are those things?
It's your promises. It's your word.
It's your word. It's your like binding promise, right?
I don't need a contract. I've got my word on that.
Right. Right. The things that we say we will uphold no matter what. Any other thoughts about what an oath is or isn't? Trust. I heard that. I think that was Bernice who said that. So there are words of warning about them that Jesus gives. And he actually repeats a similar warning in chapter 23 of the gospel. And what do you think and you might have a citation too in your Bible to Exodus 20, verse 7. What is Jesus' concern exactly?
So it sounds like people are taking oaths too lightly by his thinking.
Yeah, there's some frivolous oaths going on. That never happens today.
All the time.
One source I read called it an empty promise.
Empty promise, yeah. So it's this idea of, well, and do any of you have a citation that leads you, like a footnote that sends you to the commandments? Because, that's what we've been doing, and Jesus is pulling back to commandments. So, because this one is not quite as explicit of a tie like adultery and, murder. We remember and know those commandments. Do you have this expansion of the law tied to any particular commandment?
I would think it would be maybe connected to the second commandment, not taking God's name in vain.
That's the tie that I have to this is, I think it's Exodus 20, verse 7. Sometimes it's translated, you will not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, which, we take to mean swearing like language, but really that is absolutely about oaths. And so when I teach that to the kids, 10 Commandments stuff, we talk about that. And so what we say is, when you say God's name, God promises to be present. So you want to, not like a genie, but I mean, you want to make sure that you're using God's name well. And so that's the issue with taking God's name in vain. Is it when you are doing that frivolously or in an angry way, etc.? That is wrongful use of God's name, right? And God doesn't like to be mocked. So this is a real, it's serious. And so Jesus is telling these people not to break their oaths, right? I mean, that's pretty clear. He's got some interesting ways he talks about it. And oaths typically, not always, but typically invoked God as a witness or as the proof. Sometimes people didn't go quite that far. They would swear by heaven, for example, and H read that, right? But the whole idea is that it's emphasizing the seriousness of the promise. If you are invoking powers beyond you to help you keep this promise. But the whole idea, as you have caught on pretty easily, is that people sometimes break their oaths, sometimes take oaths with the intention of not even keeping them, right? They weren't even afraid to break them, which sort of made the oath itself duplicitous. Go ahead.
How does an oath of vengeance fit in here?
Oh, that's a great question, because there are those too in the Old Testament, aren't there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great question. What do you think? Do you think God is a big fan of oaths of vengeance?
Oh, no. Even if it seems to be for, for righteous purposes, at least in the mind of the person that states the oath, it's the wrong direction, absolutely the wrong direction.
So you kind of get painted in a corner. So I'm saying to myself, am I sure that my oaths, if I invoke God's name, that I am doing that well? Am I doing that in keeping with God's will? And how do I know that? whether it be, violent things, right, that you're mentioning, or even just everyday stuff. It's you start to realize the seriousness of this when you start invoking God into this stuff, right? So I think that's what Jesus is, he's making your point, which is be pretty careful. In fact, by verse 34, some people interpret this to mean you should never take an oath because you don't know for sure exactly if you're going to be able to keep it. You don't know your full level of sincerity, and you don't know if it's in keeping with God's will, right? So I don't know that we could quite go that far to say that you should never, ever, ever take an oath. We do that. I mean, we testify in court. There are lots of examples of things that we do. So what do you say to verse 34? I'm curious. That's the one that says you should not swear at all by heaven or earth or anything.
Ooh. Well, it's secular, so I'm not sure what Jesus would have said about it.
And we have secular oaths that we take, right? If you're part of a civic organization. If you ever participate in a sorority or fraternity. I mean, there's lots of things that I probably don't even know that you could think of that are oaths that you have sworn, right?
Well, Vern and I, when we graduated from veterinary school, we each took a veterinary oath.
Tell us what was contained in your veterinary oath.
I was afraid you'd ask that. It mainly dealt with animal welfare and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It was like your ethics, right? Your code of conduct.
Correct.
And when I sent out the email link, I don't know if you all scroll to the bottom, but if you do, I always try to put an image or something. And so I don't know if you caught what we had this time, but it was the Hippocratic Oath. And it was the, I think it was a piece of the original papyrus or something, which is, of course, the physician's oath, right? To first do what?
No harm.
No harm, which I'm guessing is similar to your oath.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Same with nursing too, and any medical, it's the Hippocratic Oath with do no harm.
Yes. I didn't realize nurses take the Hippocratic Oath as well. I did not know that. So how many of you have done that? I mean, we've got more than one nurse here.
I'm not a nurse, but as a CFP, we have to take a fiduciary oath.
Mm-hmm.
And what's contained in your fiduciary oath?
To put the interest of clients ahead of our own.
Mm-hmm. When we start thinking about them, there are probably lots of things that at least fit in here. It might not be the traditional Old Testament understanding of like a blood oath, right? But there are oaths and promises and vows that we take, probably some that we reaffirm as time goes on. I'm wondering if any of you have ever reaffirmed an oath, or if you've ever renounced or reversed or revoked an oath. I don't want to talk about it, right? It does happen.
Well, if you get divorced, you're sort of renouncing your oath, aren't you?
I think about religious orders. Not always do people keep those lifelong. They may renounce an oath or a promise that way. I was thinking about that, like what is when I was thinking about the Hippocratic Oath and your veterinary oath and your fiduciary oath, I was thinking about, I think there's lots of professional groups that probably have something similar. For me, it's the letter of call. And so I was reading that going, I'm trying to remember what's all in there. And mine says that I will preach and teach the word of God in accordance with the scriptures and the Lutheran confessions, administer holy baptism and communion, lead us in worship, proclaim the forgiveness of sins, provide pastoral care, speak for justice on behalf of the poor and oppressed. I don't know if you knew that was in there. To encourage persons to prepare for the ministry of the gospel, to impart knowledge of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and its wider ministry, to endeavor to increase support given to our congregation to the work of the whole church, to equip us for witness and service, and guide us in proclaiming God's love through word and deed. It's all right on this little fancy paper that Barry Olson signed. And Howard Lestrud signed as our church secretary, and Bishop Delzer signed. This was 2017, that letter of call. So we do have things that we promise, and they are a big deal. Witnesses are sworn in, right? Have you ever been in court? Have you ever had to do that, where you've raised your right hand?
Yes.
How many of you have done that? Okay. And what was that like? Do they have you swear on a Bible, Joanne? Did you put your hand on a Bible or on something? Do you remember? Sometimes they just have you raise your hand. I don't know that they always have you have a book there, or, you know, your religious book.
I had a rather extreme way of being tested about my oath. For 30 months, I was a cryptographer and had a very high security clearance in the Army. And every 3 or 4 months, they gave you a lie detector test to see whether or not you had leaked any classified information. And you learned real quick that you needed to watch and think what you're doing beforehand and what you're talking about and things like that. And that, like I said, went on for 30 some months. And the first time lie detector test was kind of scary because you don't know what they're going to ask you, but it was basically about who you're seeing, which towns you've been in, because over in Germany at that time, there were communist
Sure.
towns. So you were not allowed to go there, but sometimes it was tempting because you heard certain things. So they do have, you could end up in prison if you were leaking information.
Wow.
But that's pretty extreme though with that type of oath.
But I mean, it speaks to the seriousness of it, and even whether it be intentional or unintentional breaking of that oath, would be treated quite seriously. So there's an update in our chat from Diane that says nurses have a similar pledge to the Hippocratic Oath, but it is not specifically the Hippocratic Oath. But I'm guessing it is quite similar about harm and care. We are having a court process play out in the Senate chambers on this very thing right now. Did a president violate the oath of office? Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will do, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. I looked it up because I wanted to get the words right. And you can swear or affirm in the United States. Did you know that? You do not have to swear. And that is a Quaker legacy that we have inherited because Quakers would object to swearing based on Matthew 5:34. Ruth is nodding her head.
Yeah, Nixon was a Quaker.
And I believe, I'm not sure if he affirmed or swore. I guess I don't know.
He swore a lot.
Okay.
Ruth, did you want to share about that? Did you learn about you're on mute, but no.
That would have been some of my background, yes, that you would not ever swear to something like that. But then I don't remember any particular situation where somebody had to say that they would not swear. Right. So, but I mean, I knew that you do not have to swear in the court, but I did not. I just thought it was more recent that really came up, that you could say I affirm or something.
I think I was reading about it because and I think it's not super recent. Franklin Pierce affirmed the oath of office, and that would have been in 1853. He was not Quaker. He was Congregationalist by background, but he chose to affirm the oath rather than swear it. And he was the only one to recite it from memory, which I found very fascinating. So, I mean, he took it very seriously, right? And sometimes today, people who do not have a religious tradition, you know, agnostic, or if they are atheist, or if they are like secular humanists, right, they may not also care to swear because there is this, I think, even if it's not explicit, there's an implicit sense that it is by a divine name. And so if they object to that, they will also affirm. And it's certainly okay to do that, you know, like if it's against their conscience or whatever. So I've done this for my passport. I remember way back when at the post office in Rochester, Minnesota, I think I had to swear that stuff was, you know, the stuff on that was true. Job applications, it might not be, you know, raising your right hand, but you certify the information that you've provided is correct. You do that on medical forms, right? We have, I think, probably lots of oaths that we take and don't even realize. So Jesus does seem most concerned with taking what would be a meaningless oath, right, in order to create a loophole. So are you getting the gist of his ethics? You know, when we talk about divorce, right? He's saying, let's take this really seriously. Let's make sure there's not loopholes, right? Because the idea here is that we don't break. Christians are people of their word. Ephesians 4 talks about this a little bit. And there's also, I think, a little spot in James where this is similarly talked about truth telling. Verse 35, I want to make sure we march through the verses here. Verse 35 is the piece about, I think it's about heaven. Yeah, by the earth, or which is his footstool, or by Jerusalem. You know, the earth is God's, the city is God's. You know, you shouldn't be swearing by any of these things. You know, the idea was that there were these lesser oaths that you could take. And then it gets down to verse 36 about the smallest possible thing, which is the hair on your head. Do you see that? So, you know, even the tiniest thing, I think Jesus is saying, you kind of aren't in charge of, so don't be using it. And then, you know, this verse 37 about letting your yes be less, yes be yes, and anything else is like from the outside, right? From the world. That you should always be transparent as Christians when you are under oath. So you should always be under oath, so to speak. So what do you think of this? The idea that, you know, is this wise advice? That you tell the truth without embroidering it or revoking it with, you know, with the intention of revoking it, or looking for some kind of loophole that'll get you out of it, or I didn't really mean it, or that was then, this is now, or I don't recall, or why is this so hard for us?
Well, the last word there about it comes from the evil one. There's always a temptation. There's temptation involved in breaking your oath.
Mm.
And he's blaming the devil here, but the devil is us.
Well, in the sense that, you know, literally nothing, right? We would say this as Christians, probably nothing we can do can our intentions ever be pure, our motives, right? And so, when the only way to get around it, so to speak, is to say, I think what Jesus is saying, that basically you should always be under oath. You should make special oaths like, oh, for right now, really, I'm telling the truth. Otherwise, I might do what I want. But this time, right, I'm going to swear that it's true. He's saying that's the way it should be all the time. That's a high bar.
But living in a world of truth is a simpler world. It works so much better.
You don't have to remember anything. That's I always heard growing up. If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember any story.
Cool.
So pretty soon we'll all be doing our taxes and we'll sign those too.
Oofta.
Right? There are so many things about this that I think, again, it's so close to us in modern life. We might not even realize how close it is. but apparently it's still needed. Again, if we're like debating this in the, the Senate chambers right now, if we're talking about, our commitments to each other and what those look like. I mean, I think this is really important stuff. What do you guys think? Why is this so hard for us to tell the truth?
It's just another way to be selfish. I mean, we want things to be as they are convenient for us. So
I think you're very right. So let's widen that a little bit to the institutions. Last time I mentioned this, but we didn't talk about it too much. I do want to make sure as we talk about these social ethics that we think about them as individuals, but we also think about them communally, because Jesus, is delivering them to a group. So, so I want to think about it both ways, both our own individual truth telling and also the integrity of our organizations. So I want to widen it to that and say, how is the church universal, doing with transparency and honesty and integrity? What do you think?
well, we've certainly had issues in Catholicism with promises that were not kept. So that's an ongoing wound for Catholicism.
Mm-hmm. And it does cause pain. It causes distrust in the organization. I mean, we can see why Jesus' words are wise here, that Christians be people of their word, because when that does not happen, there is great pain, and I would say detriment to the witness of the church, right? I mean, I would go so far as to say that it can sometimes be a matter of one person, but sometimes it is a matter of a system that doesn't allow enough transparency, right? And that's hard. So what could be done? What do you think? What do the rest of you think about, generally speaking? Do you feel like a church is a place that honors truth telling and both personal but also group integrity? What do you think?
Isn't there, can you hear me, Heidi?
We can all hear you.
Okay, isn't there a church over out east, like a Congregationalist church that northeast, like in New York, that just acknowledged the fact that they had slaves during the Civil War, and now they have said that they acknowledge it and they would like to make reparations.
I have not read that.
So how many churches have acknowledged, and in this case, it's an old church, and the slaves actually helped build the church. So how many churches have acknowledged that we were at least implicit in slavery?
Wow. Not many, I would say, in my reading. Not many. There are some church institutions, Christian institutions that go way back, that were founded before that time. Same thing they found when they looked back to see that they benefited from slave labor, for example, to build the campus of their college, or the building was built with plantation money, that, right? When they start to see that, I have heard that there is, I don't want to say a trend, but there has been some that have looked back with that critical eye and have realized that that is part of their legacy and have tried to make reparation. But again, I don't know how many. I would not say it is. I mean, I would not say it is commonly done. So what could we do? What could be done better? I think this is a constant struggle for organizations because there is a tendency to be like self-protective and defensive, not always for bad, illicit reasons, but just like that's the nature of an organization sometimes, is to protect its influence. So what could the church do better about truth telling?
I don't know if this is an example of truth telling, but I was thinking about in recent past with the Lutheran Church. We previously hadn't taken major stands, about any political or social issue. But when there was the one recently with accepting gay people and what happened to the church, we lost. When you take a stand, then you run the risk of alienating groups, and so we did lose people coming to church, which is unfortunate. We're the welcoming place. That's our intent, but I don't know if that's an example of.
I think it is. I think it is in the sense of organizational integrity, right? And saying, as an organization, that was then, this is now. We are going to move in a direction where, and I believe, if I remember the language of that particular, because along with the social statement came a change in practice. I mean, there was changes to the church's practice nationally. And I believe the language was congregations who choose to do so may have gay and lesbian clergy, for example, or rostered leaders. And even saying that was too far for some, right? Because their understanding of biblical interpretation and church practice up until this point did not allow that. And so that felt like a very large breach, even if one's particular congregation did not change their practice. The idea that theoretically one could change their practice, that felt, I think, very hurtful, and it felt too far. It felt beyond where they could be in fellowship, right? So that was true here, and that was true across the ELCA. And I'm not sure to this day, that was in 2009. I'd have to look at the statistics to see. I'm not sure that the fear of that change in policy has caused widespread change in practice across churches. There certainly has been some, and first of all, it became, people who were gay or lesbian did not have to closet themselves. So, I mean, that's certainly true. There's more transparency there. I'm not sure about, for example, how many churches have really had to face that themselves directly. That's in individual call processes, that would be discussed, which I don't know for all of you, how many ethics in your role you have to speak to or defend about your life, but clergy still very much do. So we would have to, we have to be, there's an ethical conduct that we have to live by for our sexuality, as well as our finances, our life, etc. Our use of alcohol and drugs and so forth. There's many expectations, they're called, about how one should live. And so that expectation was changed to allow for, I think it was like, because at that time that was before gay marriage was allowed, in the Supreme Court. So legally speaking, there could not be marriage per se. So it was like lifelong monogamous partnership or something was the way the wording was, if you were partnered in any capacity. So yeah, I think that's an interesting application of this idea, because it certainly was true that we had gay and lesbian clergy prior to 2009, and many gay and lesbian parishioners.
I think we're taking a risk now with the chance of losing members with our policies that we have relating to being closed for in-person worship due to COVID.
Yeah.
It's a promise that I've made to this church and to the community that we're going to do what we can to keep everybody safe. And when it's the worst time, during this time, I strongly believe that we just cannot take the risk of having that in-person church. And I know it's causing rumblings within the community and the church, but it's something that as an executive committee, we strongly believe in. So that's a risk that we're taking now.
Right. And I think there's, even as we debate what's right and wrong, there's questions about what's true and not true comes into that, right? So like, I would say you've been a model of transparency about the metrics we're using, why we're doing what we're doing. And, folks can choose to disagree, and they do. But I think it's real important that it's not, these whole 11 months have not been, well, we just feel this way, right? This is like, well, we're looking at data, we're seeing what advice we're getting from the bishop and like the National Council of Churches, right? Who've studied these things. There are CDC guidelines that we look at. And then there's metrics for our state and our county in particular. 7 and 14 day is what you've used. And so, I think the process that you've used we've all used is very transparent. Because feelings do, all our feelings go up and down about what we wish for. But at the end of the day, we have to look at risk assessment, which is not necessarily based on our feelings, right? It's based on what's happening out around us. And we don't have our arms around COVID yet.
Donna,
Yeah.
in my opinion, I am just so pleased that you have made this stand, but you've also, we can worship through Facebook, we can worship on the radio. We are not totally, just shut the doors and not doing anything. I wanted to also just make a little comment. In my past jobs that I've had, I've worked in schools, and it wasn't surprising to me to have a student lie to my face. And I'm sure Carrie can agree to that. But what surprised me was when I started working with seniors, I found that they did the same thing. And that hurt me. I thought, by now you should be mature, you should be able to stand up, and you should be able to realize that you're wrong, but you're not, and so that's where it's come to my understanding that I want to trust everybody, but I maybe gotta just leave a little loophole in there that they are lying to me. So, and that's sad, but that's the way I have found it to be.
And the human need for self-preservation and shame plays into that, right? And sometimes people double down on stuff that and I appreciate what you're saying about the human interaction piece of that it's not necessarily experience that will make you a truth teller, right? So where do we learn it?
Well, I just want to chime in here because this is probably the it talks about gray hairs, I think, in this verse somewhere, and I think I'm getting some, but it's probably because of this topic. And it's the last, 5 years or so, the tolerance for untruths is really frustrating. And so when you ask, what can we do to, it's really hard to know, because it seems like untruths are acceptable to so many. And for me, it's just a really high value. And so when I see tolerance and experience tolerance of dishonesty or misinformation, it really builds large frustration in my life. So yeah, I really appreciated H's comment. When truth is present, it's so much better. But I'm not one to complain. I think life is still good. I just have to try to pray for them and ignore them. But I can't answer your question on what can we do other than continue to educate and communicate what the Bible hopes for us to live by.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's not nothing, Eden, right? That's our whole life goal. I mean, journey for all of us. And I hadn't made the link between truth telling and misinformation or disinformation in that way. So I'm glad that you are making that, because I do think it's just like, I hope truth is catching, right? And vulnerability and transparency is catching. Likewise, I think it is very possible that misinformation is catching. And so to stop that is sometimes to be seen as a disruptor, which doesn't feel pleasant.
So what do we do?
Yeah,
So what do we do when it comes to a time where telling the truth is hurtful?
Did everyone hear H's question?
To be completely honest with someone and to telling them the truth is hurtful.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about an instance, but it certainly comes up.
Yeah. Well, and I think there are ways that one can be truthful and not be very nice, right? And then there are ways one can be truthful and with with holding the value of kindness as well.
Doesn't it say somewhere that love is the superior ethic?
Mm-hmm. And love does not mean going along always, right? So love can mean, like, if my kid is in the street running toward and there's a car coming, I'm going to yank him out of the street. And that doesn't feel pleasant. But I'm bound to do it by love.
So being truthful, you have to watch your approach, with, like Vern said, a loving approach or a positive approach versus the critical approach. I don't know.
I would certainly say when I've needed to learn hard truths about myself, I have been much more amenable to hearing that when the demeanor does not betray the greater concern, right? So it's not about scoring points on you or assassinating your character, right? It's about this piece of this thing and I don't feel this way, or you are incorrect, right? And that is tricky to do. And I do hope we look to Jesus for that, to know that, we also only hold partial truth some of the time. and we need correction as well.
This is a little random, but do you think that's why social media has really taken off, is that people can say these most incredible things that they wouldn't normally say to a person's face? Do they feel more protected or empowered? It's just been, this last year or so has been incredibly interesting in seeing what people are comfortable posting. It's been very scary, I think, at times.
have you all, do you all feel the way Diana's feeling about that kind of market change, or I guess I'd say escalation in hostility? I don't know what to call it.
True.
Yes.
It depends on who you follow. You can follow people that tell the truth honestly, and then you can follow people that send you a pack of lies.
Mm-hmm.
You get to pick who you follow.
One example is, like I'll follow Amy Klobuchar or Katie Kerr, or, some people that post some really nice, kind of thought-provoking things. And then to see what people respond to them is just really out. I think it's off the wall sometimes. They're just vicious. So it's not that they asked for that. Or Governor Walz, you follow him, and some people will say they really think he's doing a great job. Some will say you need to be impeached. And, it's just really a free-for-all.
I had to report someone on Facebook it was summer, and the governor was speaking, but the press conference, it actually was the mayor of St. Paul, Mayor Carter was speaking. It was during the time of violence and unrest in our cities. And I had to report someone because their comment on the live stream was hang the governor. And I mean, it was 8:00 on Saturday morning. And I said to Paul, like, what is this world coming to? You're right. I don't know this individual. This was not an individual in our community. But just to see that even come across the feed as like something you would type in and say, I thought, what in the world? I wouldn't say that that's uncommon.
I think people have gotten to be more brazen with this whole thing because even though their name is associated with it, they don't care. Yeah. And it's so sad. And, I guess I look at it that justice will be done at some point, but if they're, they could have a long road of this injustice that they're doing before that the real justice hits them. But justice will prevail at some point in their life.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've gained a greater appreciation in the past few years for how important leadership is. The commonly seen character assassinations of all kinds and finger pointing has kind of become altogether too much the norm.
Yeah. Thank you. Do any of you have Eugene Peterson's The Message in front of you? Do any of you read from that? It's a paraphrase, so it is not a direct translation. I want to read it for you because I think it's interesting what he says. He uses different idioms that are closer to like Americanized idioms. So, Jesus spoke that way, but sometimes it gets lost a little bit when he starts talking about hair on his head and don't swear by the footstool, right? Like that's not the way we talk. So here's what Eugene Peterson says. And don't say anything you don't mean. This counsel is embedded deep in our traditions. You only make things worse when you lay down a smokescreen of pious talk saying, I'll pray for you and never doing it, or saying God be with you and not meaning it. You don't make your words true by embellishing them with religious lace. In making your speech sound more religious, it becomes less true. Just say yes and no. When you manipulate words to get your own way, you go wrong.
Good words for today.
Cool.
So your word should be your promise. Jesus says that, right? And oath or no oath, just say what you mean. Stick to it. So as we conclude, we're just about out of time. We always talk about the concrete actions or the daily ethics. Before we move to, I want to ask you that question, so I'll be thinking. But before we do, is there anything else any of you would like to share about oaths, truth telling, integrity, etc.?
When we, I feel like I have to do terms of service all the time, and I don't read all the way through it. Is that making it up? How do we handle that?
Just
Right?
click OK.
Okay.
Right? It's true. And we don't always stop to think what I'm agreeing to.
Yeah.
What am I agreeing to here?
Yeah.
And of course, with social media, that's the real dastardly part. I try to tell the kids, if it's a free service like Snapchat or TikTok or Facebook, whatever, if it's free, the service and the product is you. So remember that, because all that data gets collected, and like you said, manipulations are easy to do, and maybe that's a very cynical take, but I do believe that. So as we finish up, if you're centering truth and personal and corporate integrity, what will you do this week?
Keep telling the truth, being honest.
Think before talking.
Got that down. Any other thoughts?
It's okay to say yes or no. And that's it, maybe.
I like that. And there's Jesus, maybe they didn't have a word in Greek for maybe. But I bet they did. And he didn't use it.
We need to spend our life like we are on the jury and seeking the truth. Not just say it, but we need to also be looking for it.
I'm writing. Keep talking, everyone.
I build on that. What H said too is to continually seek sources of truth. Good luck with that.
I find Jesus' words very very they're difficult, but they also are, to me, very personally inspiring about the values that we hold in common. And I think this is a very faithful position we're talking about. When Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. At least I am hearing that it is okay to have a point of view. Other ethical commitments you want to share?
I really liked the comment about love is the superior ethic, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great rule to live by.
Yeah. And love.
Thanks, Fern, for mentioning that. Yeah.
And love seeks the truth. Right? Okay. Well, this was a great conversation again this morning. We're going to close with prayer, and then I'll tell you about next week. So let us pray. Lord, bless us for this week ahead as you came in fulfillment, not abolishment, as you came in love, not legalism, as you came to save and not to condemn. Your name is not designed for us to manipulate advantage in human affairs, but is sought humbly by us for wisdom and guidance. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, next week, February 17th, Ash Wednesday, we will be studying the section about nonviolent resistance. It's verses 38 through 42, if you want to skim them. and that will be next week's discussion. You did not realize how much stuff was in the Sermon on the Mount, did you? We're still in the first chapter of it. I feel the same. It's been really good. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful, blessed day.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.